Well, good morning. This is fun, baby dedications and kids, and I love it. In case you had a COVID baby, a lot of people found that as a good pastime. They thought that would make the pandemic go by quicker, at least maybe the first initial step of that, and then after that it was all downhill from there. But hey, if you had a child in the pandemic and you didn't get to dedicate them, that's totally cool. We would love to dedicate them. So you can reach out to us through email or through the text number, and we'll give you all the information. I'm hoping our next dedication has lots more kids and probably of all different ages because of all the lockdowns. Some of your babies aren't babies anymore. But we would just so as a community love to pray over them. So please take us up on that. We just think that's a valuable part as a community, is celebrating, welcoming new members into our community and covenanting with them to raise them up to be more like Jesus. So welcome if you're new. My name's Mark, if we haven't met yet. And coming out of Easter, we're jumping back into our In Training series, and we are talking all about following Jesus. It's where we've been for just over a year now. Someone sent me a message. They're like, you realize we just hit the 1 year mark. I was like, wow, okay. No, I didn't realize that, but we're not even ready for this. Not even halfway, almost, but not quite. But it's been an adventure, and today I'm so excited. It's kind of like a two-parter on the specific topic that, again, we just bump into as we're following Jesus through the book of Luke. And so if you've been journeying with us, this is going to continue to just feel like we're on the journey. And if you're new and this is your first time, don't worry. Today will stand completely on its own as we explore more of the life of Jesus. Now, today, sometimes it's like, I always tell you, like, sometimes I need like a story or a joke to get things rolling, or, this just starts off crazy. Like, it just starts off wild. I just want to jump into the text because like, it just goes, okay? So Luke chapter 12, verse 13, here's a bit of the context. Jesus is now on a journey. He's headed toward Jerusalem. He's meandering. He's stopping in villages. He's arguing with religious people. He's calling them hypocrites. He's, having meals with his disciples. He's like, guys, seriously, how many times do I have to tell you this, right? Like constantly just having all these different interactions. He's healing people. He's casting demons out. Lots of stuff is happening. And it's like wherever Jesus goes, there's a crowd. Okay, and that's where we pick up the story. Someone in the crowd said to him, okay, so I want you to picture the crowd. Like this is like, I just imagine lots and lots of people, okay? When you can turn water into wine, when you can take the equivalent of a tuna sandwich and feed 5,000 people, lots of people show up at your next event, okay? So picture a big crowd. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." I want you to just picture yourself in this moment. Sometimes we don't read the Bible with our imaginations, okay? But like literally, like you just imagine like the crowd is trying to get close. Maybe I'll touch him, maybe I'll be healed. I have a demon, I could really use some prayer, right? Like everyone's there. And all of a sudden, someone kind of just shoves their way to the front and like, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Like, can you just imagine the audacity? Like, just imagine like in the middle, even if I'm not Jesus, but like imagine someone just in the middle, like, "Excuse me, Mark," just comes up here, like, "Can you help me with this inheritance issue?" Right? It's just like, "Bud, like we're doing something here. Like, send me an email. Like, we'll set up a coffee," right? But like, not the right time. Like, where's your tact? And it's like, that's exactly what's happening in this moment, right? Imagine the conversations that night. "Mom, I was watching Jesus. It was incredible. And he was about to heal this person. And this guy just shoves his way through the crowd. There was this person who just wanted to be prayed for. And he kind of just, stepped in front of them and just was like, 'Hey, help me with this inheritance issue.'" It's like the audacity. Could you be any more tone deaf? Like, just imagine the conversations of how ridiculous this is. And I love Jesus' reply. Jesus doesn't say, "Hey, bud, I'd love to help you. If you just send me an email, I'll let you know my office hours and we can work this out. Just bring your brother, I'll straighten him out. Don't worry." It's not what Jesus says. Jesus never does what we expect him to do. This is what he says: "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" And I love that man, it doesn't translate well from the Greek, but it's almost like, "Hey, man," or "Come on, man," or "Buddy, bro, what? Like there's just like this, seriously, right? Like, who appointed me judge or arbiter between you? Basically, nope, I'm not helping. That's not my job. I have zero interest in helping you with your dispute." That's from Jesus, God in the flesh, God incarnate, God in a bod. Jesus, good old Jesus. It's a little perplexing if you're reading this in the first century because it wasn't uncommon for rabbis to actually help with these kind of disputes. So even though it was completely tone deaf, you kind of expect like, "I can help you with that later, but now I'm kind of busy." But Jesus is like, "No, I'm not helping, period." It's like, what's happening in this moment? And as you keep reading, you start to realize that Jesus seems to think there's an issue beneath the issue. There's an issue in this man's heart. And Jesus always goes after the heart. Jesus has no desire to get people to behave properly and not fix things on the inside. Jesus always wants to work with the heart and have everything flow out of that. And that's exactly what he's gonna cover in this moment. So here he goes. So he's like, no, I'm not helping you. Then he said to them, watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. To which, if I'm the guy who just I haven't even gotten back out of there yet because the crowd's pressing in, right? It's just like, whoa, are you talking about me? Are you calling me greedy? It's like, bro, you just pushed someone out of the way who wanted to have prayer for their broken leg so you could ask me to fix your financial issue with your brother. Seriously? That's just I'm making this story up in my head, okay? I realize that, right? But watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. I imagine some people are like, what? Right? And he says, life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. Let's take that second part for a second, because that part, I think we can just all agree, whether you're religious or not, most people in our culture, we've reached the point where we realize, North America, we pretty much have all the possessions we could ever want, and we've kind of reached the threshold, and we kind of say this, we say it to our kids, hey, it's not all about money and things, right? We all kind of get to that point where we're life's more important than money and things, right? We all different kinds of ways that we say that, nobody asks for stuff on their deathbed, they always ask for people, right? So make sure you invest in people, not things. There's no U-Hauls behind your hearse. You can't take your stuff with you when you die. We get this part, right? 2,000 years later, we've got a lot of possessions and we kind of realize there's more to life than just your possessions. So we can agree with the second part. Second part of this statement from Jesus, we totally agree with. The first part, this part, I don't know if we as much resonate. Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Watch out, be on your guard. You know what that is? It's a double warning. A double warning from Jesus, right? It's whenever there's a double warning, watch out, be on your guard. It's this is serious. Against all kinds of greed. Quick poll here, okay, just for fun, little interaction. Raise your hand if you have either kids, grandkids, you're an aunt, uncle, a teacher, crossing guard. You have some sort of influence over children in your life somewhere. Security guard at the mall. Okay, yeah, lots of us. Okay, fantastic. And I can pretty much guarantee you, all of you have just raised your hand, have at one time or another, some of you would actually say you're professionals at this, warned a child about something, right? It's put your seatbelt on. My wife tells the kids, put the seatbelts on or you could get hurt. I'm put your seatbelt on or you could fly through the front windshield and die. You didn't come here for my parenting advice. I know. I'm not the parenting guru, I'm the pastor. That's terrible. But we all have our ways of warning kids, and it's all different, right? Some of us, it's no. Did you look both ways? Okay, and then when you're on the road, did you look both ways again? No, but cars could, right? We're experts at warning our kids in a parking lot. No, careful. It's a parking lot. There are moving cars. I know those ones are stopped, but it could start moving anytime. We warn our kids. We warn our kids, say no to drugs. Careful with alcohol. Look out for predators. We don't keep secrets. No, if someone asks you to keep a secret, you come and tell mama, papa right away, right? We have all kinds of warnings for our kids. Don't let anyone touch you. If someone touches you, tell us right away, right? So many warnings. What else do we warn our kids about? I don't know what you warn your kids about. Some of you are watch out for those liberals. Watch out for that liberal agenda. Or those conservatives and their conservative agenda, right? Or the gay agenda, or the progressive agenda, or their political agenda. Watch out. I don't know what you warn your kids about, okay? But all of us warn kids about certain things. All of us have different lists, but we all warn them. Quick poll. Again, you can raise your hands. This will be fun. How many of you this morning, when your kids were leaving the house, or the kids you see, or crossing guard or security guard, how many of you said, watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed? Online? No? Nobody. You're not very good Jesus followers. You don't take your Bible very seriously, do you? I'm just messing with you. It's interesting. This warning is not a one-off. In fact, some theologians have looked at all the topics. Some people have a lot of time on their hands. They've counted all the topics Jesus talked about, divided them up. They've actually discovered that Jesus pretty much talked about money, wealth, and greed 25% of the time. Imagine if I preached 25% of my sermons on money and what, y'all would be gone a long time ago. Jesus talks about money all the time. He talks about greed all the time. And he's constantly talking about the dangers of wealth and greed. You can summarize it. It's he's constantly warning people about it. Now, at this point, most people start checking out of the message, right? Because everyone knows what greed is. Everyone agrees that greed is an issue in the world, but nobody thinks they have an issue with greed. Don't believe me? Next time you're at a party, just try this. It's a fun conversation starter. Hey, do you know anyone who's greedy in your life? After you get past the so what do you do for a living? What part of town do you live in? When you run out of questions, here's a great one. Do you know anyone who's greedy, in your life? They'll immediately start mentioning politicians, big CEOs, big pharma or whatever like that. They'll mention some dictators who just continue to fight for more land. They'll mention their uncle. They'll mention maybe their spouse, right? You know what they'll never do? And I promise you, they'll never do it. They'll never be like, oh, funny you should ask that. I'm greedy. Never gonna happen. You know how I know that? Because I'm a pastor and people tell me everything. There's some times where people tell me things and I'm like, I don't even know what that is. I straight up have to Google that after you leave my office. Like literally, and like over a decade of pastoring, you know how many people have come to my office and be like, Pastor, I'm so glad you can make time for me today. I got a greed issue. None. Greed is this thing that impacts all of us. Doesn't matter the wealth level you sit at, it impacts all of us. And yet none of us, or most of us, don't have any idea that it's at play in our lives. So today and next week, because the next passage, Jesus also covers this, it's part of the 25%, we're gonna talk about the issues of greed and money and how we view things. And as Jesus people, we're gonna take Jesus' warning seriously because we take Jesus seriously. And I'm gonna poke a little in this time, in the next 2 weeks, and I'm actually poking myself too. Trey and I were just having a conversation this week about how this is a conversation we wanna be having more in our family and our marriage and all that. And we're just gonna be asking the question, I'm just on the journey with you, of what this means for us as we dig into these words from Jesus. Because Jesus gave a double warning. Watch out, be on your guard. And most of us, pretty much guarantee, most of us have not highlighted this verse in our Bibles. We've read right past it, and we've never taken this part seriously. And yet I think he's got something to say to us. So I'm just gonna invite you, could we have an open posture for this next 2 weeks, just to say, okay, I don't think I'm greedy. I don't think I have a problem with this. I don't think this warning was for me, but I'm open to seeing what Jesus says on this topic. Now, if you're not a church person, not a Christian, you're like, great, first Sunday at church, they're talking about money. Check, this is hitting all the stereotypes. Should have been here 2 weeks ago. We did hell too. That would have hit another one, right? But I don't want you to worry. There is zero desire for us to ask any money from you. In fact, I won't be asking for money in this series at all. That's not the desire of the series. In fact, Jesus spoke about money 25% of the time. Do you know how many times Jesus asked people for money? Never. There's one time he's like, does anyone have a coin? Does a little teaching sermon analogy and then hands the coin back. Only time literally that Jesus asked anyone for money, and yet he's always talking about money. He's constantly warning people the dangers that money can have because money has a way of gripping our hearts in a way we don't even realize. I love the way, I think it was Andy Stanley who said it, something like this. I just kind of wrote it down from memory. Jesus doesn't want your money. He just doesn't want your money to get you. That he was warning people over and over again, careful. This is dangerous. It requires a double warning. So we're gonna jump and journey on this for the next 2 weeks. So here goes, because now Jesus is like, I'm gonna tell you a story to try and make a point. So Jesus, in verse 16, he told them this parable. A parable, if you're new to Bible reading, a parable is a made-up story to make a real point. Rabbis, Jewish rabbis, would regularly tell parables. A made-up story to make a real point. Sometimes they're kind of ridiculous, so the story sticks in your brain, okay? Verse 16, he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. Okay, farmers, and we got a few farmers in the room, you know there's at least two things required for success in agriculture. I would argue every industry and anyone who's ever been successful needs these two things to be working in tandem. But farmers, you're very, very aware of these two realities. You need hard work. Farmers are like, yeah, you don't even know hard work, Mark. You push paper all day and drink coffee in meetings. I know. Hard work, good conditions. Hard work, good conditions. The agricultural community is very aware there's no such thing as a self-made man. That you can work as hard as you want, but if you don't get the right weather and the right conditions and the right soil, it doesn't matter. You need hard work and good conditions. Immediately, Jesus is telling a story, and everyone in that culture would know, yeah, he's successful because maybe he worked hard or he made some wise decisions, but also there's a God part in it that was completely out of his control that worked in his favor. Immediately, they're thinking about that. He thought to himself, so remember, it's a made-up story, and now we're getting to see the person's thoughts. I love that Jesus really gives his characters and his made-up story some real personality. He's like, let me tell you what he was thinking. He thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops, and we're gonna discover in a minute. He has barns, they're just not big enough. He's like, I don't know where to put all this excess food. What should I do? Now, it's an obvious rhetorical question to the people that are there in that moment, and everybody there knows the answer. There's only one answer. Remember, what should he do? It's an agrarian society. Remember a couple weeks ago, we talked about the person in the middle of the night looking for bread. They'd go to their neighbor because often they just cooked in a communal oven. Everything was very communal. So in a communal society, the answer, what do you do with all this excess grain? You share it. That's the only answer. Then you add the Jewish part, the theological part, not just the social part, but the theological conviction is that these people believed in blessing. Not blessing the way we talk about it, hashtag blessed. Blessing all throughout Scripture is different. Blessing is not, wow, God must be really happy with me. He gave me all this great stuff. I'm so blessed. Blessing was, wow, God has given me something. I'm responsible to bless others with it. You were always, all throughout Scripture, you will see this theme from the beginning to the end. People are blessed to be a blessing. They are given something to share it with others. So socially, they're just a culture that should be sharing. Theologically, they believe anything we're blessed with is meant to be a blessing to all those around us. So the answer, the obvious and only answer to this rhetorical question was, well, you share it with your community. That's what you do when you don't have enough room to store it. And then the crazy part of the story, because that's what happens in a parable. Excuse me. Then he said, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. We don't realize how crazy this story is in the first century ancient Near East. These are people who on average had one extra cloak or one extra tunic to their name. This is completely absurd, and Jesus is trying to make a point. Now, some of Jesus' examples don't translate well 2,000 years later, right? Some of them I have to kind of like, hey, okay, so wineskins. I know we don't have wineskins. We just go to the LCBO and we just, pop the cork, right? But wineskins, they had it aged in there. And new wineskins, old wineskins, and they explode, right? Like, here's what you have to understand about 2,000 years ago, right? Some stories, though, age really well. In fact, a lot better than they did even in the moment. Can you imagine that? And this one aged really well. Build bigger barns. North Americans, we're really good at building bigger barns, aren't we? I mean, in the last 70 years alone, our houses have doubled in square footage. The average house has, ready for this, 300,000 items in it. We used to, I don't know if you remember this, we used to park our cars outside. Then we built these things like little car tents called carports. We had those. Then we had this thing called a garage. We built little homes for our cars. Then we got these things called 2-car garages and 3 and 4 and, car barns. And those are all things now. And then here's the crazy thing. 25% of people who own a 2-car garage can't fit one car in it because of all the stuff they have stored in there. Some of you just nudged your spouse like, see, that's your problem. Some of you nudged back and said, and it's also a problem for 25% of the population, so shut up. Then we have storage rooms. Storage rooms. Some of you are like, I grew up, I didn't even have my own room. It's like we have rooms for our stuff. And then we have storage lockers and storage facilities, which I may or may not have watched a lot of documentaries on in my spare time. It's a fascinating business. And here's a fun road trip game. If you've run out of cows and airplanes to point out to your children, start looking for storage facilities. You will be blown away by how many storage facilities there are in the world. In fact, want to hear a fun fact? There are, if you take, this is an American stat, Canadians are pretty close to Americans. I know, we're not Americans, but a lot of the stats work well. If you break down all of the storage square footage of closed, sealed storage and by the number of people that live in the States, you ready for this? Each person gets 7.3 square feet. 7.3, do you know how big 7.3 square feet is? All the contractors are like, we know exactly what that is. Some of you are like, is it like the size of this stage? No, 7.3 square feet. Let me just show it for you for just a second, okay? This is 7.3 square feet. Want something amazing? Check this out. You can ask my wife this. This is what I look like when I sleep. Unless we're in an argument, then this is what she sees. But just think about this. I mean, I'm 6'1". I can easily sleep. In fact, not only can I sleep in 7.3 square feet, I'm big spoon. Trefina's only 5'1". Babe, you can fit right here. Like 2 of us can fit in 7.3 square feet. In fact, sometimes when our kids aren't feeling well, in fact, sometimes even when they're feeling well, this is all they give us of our bed. They take up the rest of the real estate. Like, isn't this wild that like, you can literally, just in the spaces that we've built for stuff, have enough space for everyone to sleep with a roof over their heads in North America. Take that in for a second. And then think about this. Let's pause and regroup. Jesus says, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. And then he shares this radical story of a guy who looks a lot, you could argue, like us. Anyone want to keep going with the story? And he continues to tell us what this person is thinking. And he said to himself, this is what I'll do. You've plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry. Isn't that the dream? Leverage your wealth for your freedom. Freedom 55, or freedom to be free to do this or that, or to never have to do this or that again. And then Jesus lands the plane. He says this, but God said to him, all of a sudden, I love these parables, right? God just shows up in the story and starts speaking to the person in the parable. But God said to him, you fool! This very night, your life is demanded from you. Then who will get what you've prepared for yourself? I love the imagery, like fool, like it's quite strong language. You can translate it like stupid, like this was so dumb. Like how did you think this was a good idea? The bottom line at this point in the story is you made all your plans without considering anybody else. You thought you could control outcomes with good plans and good stockpiles. But life's not like that. And your life could be gone tomorrow. And then it's all a waste. And the question in the story that God asks is, and who's gonna get your stuff? And the obvious answer is, not you. So what's the point? There's so much going on in this story, and often we try and distill or flatten the parable down to one idea. But parables weren't meant to simply have a quick bottom line. They're meant to start conversations. They're meant for people to have questions and get asking questions and dialogue. You know, Jewish rabbinic teachings often were seen, and actually they looked at the scriptures like this, like a gem, that you'd turn and look at the different angles and see a little bit more and a little bit more. The purpose of a parable was for people to go home and be like, yeah, and then there was then the guy and the land, it wasn't even it, it's the land, and that's commute, right? Like it's supposed to get the conversation going and the questions asking, and the hearers of the story are supposed to wrestle with it internally and say like, what does this mean for me? Okay, so to not flatten it, but let me just for the sake of time, here's one theme that jumps out in the story that you just can't miss. My. Look at what he says. He says, my crops, my barns, my surplus grain. He made the assumption that everything was his. I love the way one author calls this. He says, it's the consumption assumption. It's simply this. Everything I have, we're gonna put it on the screen. Everything I have is strictly and solely for me. And God shows up and says, that's dumb. That approach is how you waste your life. Whether you die tomorrow or 50 years from now, a life lived for self is a life that's wasted. And then Jesus closes the story like this. Verse 21, this is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God. Now, what does that mean, rich toward God? And you can kind of play it out, but really he's just putting two things against each other. It's like people who store up things for themselves, and the opposite of storing up things for yourselves is what Jesus calls being rich towards God. Now, at first it's kind of unclear, right? You might think, okay, so we shouldn't store up things for ourselves. Maybe we shouldn't have bank accounts. Maybe we shouldn't have retirement funds. Maybe we shouldn't have investments. Maybe we shouldn't have pantries or chest freezers. Like, is that what Jesus is saying? No. If that's the case, what do we do with all the parables that talk about good stewardship and wise planning and all that? The challenge is not about abandoning storage and long-range planning. That would be far too simplistic. But the condition of the heart and how it impacts our wealth and our plans. This man, made-up man in the story, walked through life with a consumption assumption. And it was the exact opposite of how Jesus has continuously invited the people who are following him to live. What is this life that Jesus puts in comparison to it? A life rich towards God? It's life lived not simply for yourself, but on behalf of another. It's service, sacrifice, generosity, love for neighbor, care for the poor, ultimately giving everything. Jesus modeled it, giving his life, death on the cross. And we're invited to model that life and the way that we use our finances and our things to look just like that. Now, The temptation for us as we kind of reach the end today is to simply say, that's not my issue. I'm barely scraping by. But remember who Jesus is preaching to. Yes, he's preaching to the guy who's tone deaf, who showed up wanting to get more money from the inheritance. Yes, he's probably speaking to Theophilus, the person who this book, as it was compiled, is one of the stories that Luke thought this is a good one for Theophilus, who's obviously a wealthy person for him to read. But remember who the crowd is. Remember, Jesus turned to the crowd and told this story. Jesus told this story to people who literally probably only have one cloak and one tunic. Why? Because anyone can be tempted towards the consumption assumption that everything I have is strictly and solely for me. Here's how you might say it. Greed is an equal opportunity offender. It can impact the poor and the rich. And that's why I think Jesus spoke about it 25% of the time. Often people that we would not consider wealthy by any stretch of the imagination. And yet we rarely speak about it, rarely warn against it. Most of us suffer from it in some way and never know it. So what do we do? Well, the story doesn't have an application. There's no okay, so here's the 10 things you need to do to not let greed, to watch out for this. There's none of that, right? Jesus does not say, so don't ever let your barn size get bigger than this, or make sure you give this percentage of your income away, or stop buying this, or the max square footage of your house is this, or this is the level you can set your thermostat at and no higher. Some of you wish that was a Bible verse. Some of you told your spouse there was a Bible verse for that. Jesus doesn't have that, okay? The point is not how much grain you can stockpile. I think Jesus wanted people to sit with this story and reflect on their life and reflect on how they leverage their things and their money in a way that is either it is or it isn't rich towards God. Whether it is or it isn't the way of Jesus, the way of service and sacrifice or selfishness. So here's what we're gonna do this week. Next week, we're gonna talk about some spiritual practices that we can try to kind of, loosen the grip, so to speak, on our heart. But this week, I just want us to take a week and sit with this story. And most of us, including myself, need to kind of just actually let it sink in a little bit. And here's the question that I want you to ask this week, okay? This is really the only thing you need to write down from today. And I want you to think about it and have conversations about it. How do money and things pull on your heartstrings? It rhymes. I wrote that myself. Just thought I'd mention that. How do money and things pull on your heartstrings? How do money and things pull on your heartstrings? The moment you start asking that question, things start to get fun. This week, I had an experience that some of you had, where the government's now sending us money back for our license plate renewal stickers. Anyone else get a check this week or the last few weeks? Yeah, wasn't that exciting? Yeah, so all of a sudden it's like, we open this up, I'm like, a couple $100. You know what I thought the moment I opened that? I thought, orphans and widows. No, let me tell you what I actually thought. I thought, my barbecue doesn't cook very evenly right now. Sometimes the onions on the right side are really crispy and these ones are still soggy. And then there's this one spot in the middle, the burger's half cooked. I'm like, my barbecue doesn't cook very well. Not orphans and widows, not what's going on in the world. I saw money and the first thing I thought was, my barbecue doesn't cook very evenly. This is what happens when we pause and let this story. Remember, I'm writing this sermon as I'm opening this check. That all of a sudden I just realized, there was my consumption assumption. I didn't even see it. That I just assumed all of a sudden something came to me and it was strictly and solely for me. There it is. How do money and things pull on your heartstrings? So this week, I want you to just be asking that question in every area of your life. Maybe you haven't checked the mail. Some of you are like, I'm going to check the mail right now when I get home. Some of you are going to get your taxes back. I want you to think about, how does that affect, when you see that, what you're getting or what you owe, what happens to your heart when you see that? When you go online and look at your stocks, when you're in the store and all of a sudden it's not on the list, but what is happening with your heart? How easily, there's times when you say no. Some of you are like, I say yes to everybody and people want me, they need me for something, they want to go out. I always say, I don't know how to say no to people, but it's money, it's you say no to anything, right? Some of you are like, that's my parents, that's my spouse, right? It's just why do you say no so quickly? Or why do you say yes so quickly? Just take some time to actually reflect on this question, is how does money and things pull on your heart strings? And I want you to take time to think about that. I want you to take time to reflect, to journal. I love journaling, just kind of daily, just kind of processing my day and the different things I want or did or wished I didn't do and all that. Take some time to pray. Ask God about it. Ask the Holy Spirit to reveal things. Discuss it with your friends and family. Just be honest and laugh about it. I think there's something about laughing about some of these things that actually is healing and actually reveals things. And then come back next week. So take a week just to process it and then come back next week. And next week, we're gonna then talk about the societal forces that are actually pushing against us, pushing against this warning that we don't even realize and how we can actually practically push back. And next week, we're gonna talk about what Nazis, Madison Avenue, and Freud have in common. We're gonna learn from two famous New Yorkers, John D. Rockefeller and Notorious B.I.G., and learn what they can teach us about power and greed. And we're gonna learn some practical things that we can do, some exercises that we can practice, kind of practice the way of Jesus. Again, I'm not gonna be asking you for any money. This is strictly about taking Jesus' warning about the impact of our things and our wealth on our heartstrings. Okay, so that's what we're gonna be doing next week, and I don't want you to miss it. In a moment, I'm gonna bless you, but I just wanna remind you, as you go, takes time. Like, you can just hang out here, connect with each other. If you just wanna be still, maybe journal or pray, this space is here for you. We're gonna have prayer ministers up at the crosses ready to pray with you. If you're online, you can always request prayer and someone will reach out and pray for you. And also just wanna remind you, if you're new, pop by guest services and we have a gift for you and just wanna put a face to a name and say hi and welcome you. And then also just a reminder, refugees at lakesidechurch.ca, that would be a great opportunity for many of you who are looking how to help out and what's happening in the world. Can I invite you, we don't do this often, but can I just get you to stand before you go? I wanna bless you. And I wanna bless you with what the ancient Jews used to do. And I want you to take this story this week like a gem, and I want you to just sit with it. And I want you to turn it, I want you to think about it again. I want you to wrestle with it. I want you to allow it to kind of speak back to you and experience it and experience what Jesus is saying to you this week. So friends, have a fantastic week, and we'll see you next week. Bye for now.